There's a massive night and day difference between transparency and public view. And real estate agents have it wrong. I'm Andrew Gavin. I'm a licensed mortgage lender for California, and I sell real estate in San Diego. What I want to talk about today is the difference of transparency in a transaction versus the public view of information. The real estate industry has been up in arms for the last 3 or 4 months based on these NAR changes and the new settlement and the removal of buyer agent commission in the MLS. Now, my personal opinion, the main reason that the industry is up in arms because it affects them. It affects me. It absolutely affects me on my real estate side. Fortunately, I also have a mortgage business, so I'm not as triggered by this, but it will affect me. Now, real estate agents keep arguing that it's unfair to the public to not display buyer agent commission. Honestly, maybe that's true, maybe not. I don't know why it matters. I know my wife likes her finances as personal as possible. So she would like these new rules versus someone's getting paid for a service that's been posted all over the internet. And what's interesting about this from the real estate side is, it's never been publicly posted? Listing agent commission, only the buyer's agent. So they're screaming and arguing and angry about transparency, but just about specifically buyer agent commission, because that's the commission that everyone is worried about, that it's going to crush the whole industry, that sellers aren't going to fund the whole buy side of buyer agents across the country. And rightfully so, maybe they shouldn't. It's their money, it's their equity, they paid the mortgage, they made the logical choice to purchase that house. Why shouldn't they benefit by keeping every dollar that they've earned over the years that they've lived and upgraded that house? It's their money, let them keep it. I work with a lot of buyers with loans, and this is absolutely going to affect them. And it is going to be harder, but it's not necessarily unfair, because ultimately buyers have always brought all the money to the table that allows everyone to get paid, even though that money is given to the seller for their house and then the seller has paid. That's how it's worked. But everyone's up in arms about transparency, and the DOJ has ruined real estate. In my opinion, going forward, the transparency within a transaction is better for both principals. That's the buyer and the seller. Those two parties are going to make their own decisions, how they're going to pay their own agents, and they're going to make the decisions of what they do between each other. So instead of the listing agent making a deal with the seller to be paid a certain amount and then paying the buyer's agent some of that amount, well, who do we forget? It's not a part of that at all. The buyer. That's the weird thing. That's the whole reason this is a mess. And this seller was told he couldn't even use the MLS unless he agreed to pay. So it's a mess. Now, through transparency within the transaction, although the buyer's agent commission isn't posted everywhere to be seen by the public, agents, the industry, in the transaction, it's going to be more transparent because the buyer and the buyer's agent are going to agree on a fee that they're willing to pay and they're willing to work for. And then they're going to go and offer to buy a seller's house. And that seller hired a listing agent to market and negotiate the sale of the property. You've got two people doing a deal and they've agreed to pay for their own representation. That makes a lot of sense. It absolutely does affect how things work and the way they were working. It was easy. And the lawsuits that caused this didn't come up to make changes. The lawsuits were created and won by sellers who felt like they were forced to pay higher commissions than they wanted to. This is the outcome of that. So agents are freaking out about buyer agent commission not being publicly available to be seen. Sure, I guess that's transparent, but it's irrelevant. The two things that are important about transparency within the negotiations of the contract are what the buyer knows and makes decision on, and what the seller knows and can make decisions on. And now going forward, the buyer is going to only give money to the seller, except for the fees and services that they pay for on their side to help them get to the closing table. And the seller is going to pay for their own fees and all the services that help them get to the closing table to sell their house. Now, the one thing that is still a huge benefit is that all commissions are negotiable. So, although buyer agent commission is not public knowledge, it's 100% transparent in the negotiation. And as a buyer, you can still ask the seller to contribute to pay all or some of your buyer's agent commission. So if you feel that you are ready to buy, it's worth investigating the opportunity and find the most experienced real estate agent that you can afford and get them to help you negotiate deals. There's a good chance that you might have to walk away from 1, 2, or 3 deals, but you end up on the 4th or 5th one and you get that into contract and you get yourself a house. That's going to be part of it. If we rewind 2 years, there was 30 and 40 people offering on a single property during COVID. One property, 30 or 40 offers. That's a lot of people that didn't get their offer accepted for one reason or another. Your reason as a buyer today might be that you can't afford to purchase with your down payment, closing costs, and cover your agent. But it's still worth it for you to try, because there will be a seller that will agree to your terms and your prices, and you will get to purchase a home. But to be clear, these new rules and the changes that have come out of this NAR settlement with the sellers, in my personal opinion, because of the way that the buyer and seller are now on the front line negotiating with their own agent on every aspect and then transferring money between each other versus this sort of round robin between the seller, the seller's agent, the buyer's agent, totally skipping the buyer. The buyer's only bringing all the money, and he had no part in any of the negotiations of who got paid what. Surprised there's not a buyer side lawsuit in this that's popped up that's just as big as the seller one. But that's the way it is. So now buyers and sellers are on the front line negotiating every aspect with the other side, making these transactions 100% more transparent for all parties. It's definitely going to be a little bit harder with paperwork and how things are worked, a lot of the details, especially when anything is new. And as much as the industry wants to say that sellers are going to pay more, buyers are going to pay more, no one's going to save any money, I believe that both buyers and sellers will potentially save money. Because I honestly think that the negotiation that's really never happened between a buyer and their agent, my gut feeling is that that is not a fee for service, that buyers are going to agree to it being worth 3% of a sale price, especially here in San Diego. The average home is $800,000 or $900,000. That's over $25,000 to help a buyer negotiate the purchase of a sale. That is an incredible amount of money to be earned, and rightfully so. But like I said, it might not be 3%. And the good news about these updates and these rules is now that the buyer and their agent are negotiating what fee the buyer feels is fair for this service. And if that buyer says, I would like to ask the seller to contribute to pay all of that, the seller is only required to pay up to the amount that the buyer had agreed to. In my world, I believe that 3% is probably not going to be the buy side number anymore. And so that means that now for a seller, they might pay 3% to their listing agent, but they aren't going to pay 3% to the buy side, because I believe that that's going to be negotiated to a lower number. To recap, the public view of buyer agent commission is really the only thing that's gone away. One item. Listing agent commission's never been public, but now under these new rules, although information is not in public view, that information is now 100% more transparent in the transaction between the buyer, their agent, the seller, and their agent. So all four people in the transaction, and more importantly, the two principals, the buyer and seller, know exactly what's happening, and they both got to be part of the decision to pay their own agents, and they got to negotiate between each other if either one's going to contribute to the other side or take some type of a credit. But it's 100% more transparent going forward, even though some information is not in public view. So that's how I feel. Because I am a mortgage lender as well as a real estate agent here in San Diego, I see all this stuff a little bit different than the typical real estate agent, especially the buyer agent that specifically work buy side only. This is a major shakeup, and it makes sense that people are worried because it's our livelihood. Our income is in question, and there is no guarantee anymore. It all has to be negotiated, but I believe that's going to work out. I don't believe buyers and sellers expect anybody to work for free, and we're going to figure this out. But as I said, the public view of information might have been reduced by this, but real estate transparency, in my opinion, has been increased to 100%. Have more questions, please reach out.